Great. So I'm delighted to welcome Julien Clancy to this session today. Julien has been helping people tell their stories for over 20 years. He's a multi-award winning radio and producer, and his documentaries have been broadcast across channels here in Ireland as well as the UK. And he began creating stories for the airwaves and sharing them with at live listening events. So the radio nights gradually evolved into a new form of storytelling night featuring true personal stories from the audience, which is known as the Dublin Story Slam. For the last 7 years, the Dublin Story Slam has hosted close to 1,000 storytellers on stage at a monthly sold-out shows at the Sugar Club and annually at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. And since 2018, Julien has also been the creative director for Child Talks, an annual storytelling event for young people from the Ombudsman for Children's Office. However, it was during lockdown that Julien began working with large organisations to bring the power of storytelling into the workplace, to bring teams together. And this is where us as a firm, Deloitte, have been really privileged to work with Julien and the Dublin Story Slam for the last 3 years. Over 15 events featuring hundreds of our partners, directors and managers and teams. So Dublin Story Slam has helped us introduce a culture of personal storytelling within Deloitte, which has had a huge impact on our people right across the organisation. And I've been at a couple of the events that Julien helped to bring those stories to life, and I can definitely attest to the power of getting this right. And I've heard some of our partners talk at events. So here to tell us more about the transformative power of storytelling for your organisations is Julien Clancy. So you're very welcome, Julien, and thank you so much for your time today.
Hi, Adrienne. I'm very, very happy and excited to be here and to be talking to everybody in on today's call.
Great.
So will I launch into it, or do you want to have a chat beforehand, or what?
Launch right into it. We'll probably before we'll be coming up to 1:45, and I'm sure there's going to be loads of questions for you. So I want to make sure we get keep some time for people to put you on the hot seat.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some slides. If there's time, I'm going to try and play a story from one of our nights to kind of give people an idea of what it is that we're involved. But I'm going to start, I suppose, really by sharing what exactly is the Dublin Story Slam. How do we go from telling stories to each other and you know, I don't know if you've been to the Sugar Club before. It's a beautiful kind of theater type space, but it's in essence the kind of the pub. There's a bar there. There's lots of drinking. It's a really fun, entertaining night. But how do we take from stories in the pub setting to stories within large organizations? Well, basically, I'll tell you a little bit more about how the night itself works, and then this is going to really amplify, I suppose, what the message that we have here, that everybody has a story worth sharing. So the Dublin Story Slam, it's an open mic storytelling night. So what that means is that people come along to the show, they sign up to tell a story. So they can sign up in advance, or they can sign up on the spur of the moment on the night. There's usually a different theme each night. People get up and they share true personal stories around 4 to 7 minutes long on stage. And at the end, there's scores given. An overall Story Slam champion is announced. The stories can be ridiculously funny, usually told by people who would never have thought of themselves as being funny, or that the story itself was funny. But something happens sometimes when people tell stories on stage. They just take on a life of their own. So they can be hilarious. They can also be really shocking. As you can see here from Sharon Manions, or one of our co-hosts, as reaction. You just don't know what you're going to hear from that person, because we don't know what the story really is all about. But the amazing thing is that these people who, as I said, may never have told this story before, you know, and doing it on the spur of the moment, they take part in the Story Slam, they become a Story Slam champion, and then they are invited back to take part in the annual Grand Slam Championship. And this is kind of like the All Ireland. So they go to the Abbey stage where they perform a brand new story inspired by a brand new theme. And we've been doing the Abbey Show now for 7 years. It's always a highlight of the calendar year. We've got one coming up in December. And what the lovely thing about it is this kind of circle, this is really what we've discovered in the 7 years of doing this, is that idea of everybody being in an audience and feeling like, don't really have a story worth sharing. I have an anecdote, or I've got, a few lines here maybe about something that's funny, but I don't know if I've actually got a full proper story that I can go out onto a stage and command an entire, 500 people's attention for a full 7 minutes. And the thing is that we do. This is Daisy. Daisy is a dentist, and she was a very first Grand Slam champion, and she's probably one of our favorite storytellers, because she arrived back in Dublin after living in London and wanted to reconnect with people, didn't know anybody, and so started coming along to the story slams just as a way to kind of meet people and reconnect, and gradually found the confidence to get up and share her own story, which was about her journey through manufacturing custom-made capes from her bedroom, while also studying for a master's and being a dentist, and it all just getting a little bit too much. And for Daisy, one of the lovely things that she said about that whole experience is that when she spoke about an experience on a stage, through the structure and the kind of the safety, I suppose, of telling it in a story form, she was able to process what that experience really meant to her. And so she was able to kind of put it behind her in a way. So there's a massive cathartic release that can happen for people when they get up on stage. And that's just the kind of the storyteller. So like during lockdown, when we couldn't do any kind of physical shows, we reached out to a few large organizations. You may remember the old table quiz or possibly the pizza making incident. And I think people were starting to look for something new. And Deloitte were one of the very first organizations to kind of come on board and give it a go. And we basically applied the same format. We just said, look, we want to speak with like 3 of your partners, of your leaders, of your team managers, and we'll help them find, develop, and deliver a personal, true story inspired by a particular theme. And this was the very first event that was held, called Perspectives. And it was the idea of, resilience, and like, this was during lockdown. Things were incredibly dark. So these were stories of overcoming tough challenges, but more importantly, about giving people hope and giving people tools that they needed in order to navigate all the chaos that was kind of happening at the same time. So when we finally managed to kind of get back and start doing physical events, we've extended out. So we work with like St. James's Hospital. Here we are with Owen Keegan and Dublin City Council. And what we've done is we've evolved into terms of telling that personal story and that personal connection, into trying to tell stories that almost reflect the core values of an organization. And we're still using the same kind of format, personal, true story, about 4 to 7 minutes long. But we use also the organization, like where that organization is going, where it wants to go, as inspiration for finding stories that we want to share within the organization. We also work with charities, and this is a recent event we did with Stand, which is a group of change makers who had basically, it's like a pitching session for funding for their kind of big idea. So kind of like a TEDx style with a little bit of competition thrown in. And so we spent time with each person trying to basically help them find, develop, and deliver a story that they could weave into their presentation. A story that was going to kind of show the audience why this idea matters. And this is the thing, when it comes down to like, why should organizations share stories? There are 3 main reasons why every single organization should be sharing their stories. Okay, their people's stories, your team's stories, your leaders' stories to each other. The first is well-being. So I mentioned before about Daisy and her being a dentist and this lovely cathartic kind of release of being on stage and being able to process that. That is almost amplified when you work in an environment that is a challenging one. Okay, when you're working in where you've got stress, you've got deadlines, Now, we're obviously speaking with all of you who are working in charities, not for profits. And that is a whole other level of challenge and stress, because the issues you're trying to tackle are very big and scary and incredibly personal to you. Like, everybody gets involved in charities because there's a personal connection to the issue that they're trying to fix or trying to address. And what we've found, just doing a little bit of research, is that storytelling in a stressful kind of work environment, either external stress or internal stress, storytelling is a great release. In Stanford University, the business school, there was a medical storytelling night that happens for students and for teams and for healthcare professionals. And what they did is that they asked people beforehand, going in, level of distress, and then after they took part in the storytelling workshops and the storytelling event, how they felt. And incredibly, it was somewhere between 36 to 40% reduction in the amount of stress that they felt before they went to the workshop and after they went to the workshop and storytelling event. And incredibly, those effects, actually, that impact lasted for up to a month afterwards. So when you're working in this environment, and especially, as I say, so many charities here and so many different big issues, that issue is your baby, okay? That is what you are there driven by every single day to get up and go into work. But that comes at a price as well. And storytelling, when it's done right and when it's done safely, it can be a very supportive kind of release for that story. Just to say the words out loud, to kind of talk, give people something to talk about. It affects your well-being. The other thing, though, about storytelling within organizations is that storytelling helps people become better communicators. Okay. So if I am ever working with an organization and sometimes what they will say is, oh, I have just the speaker for you. Amazing speaker, so confident, really, really loves this kind of thing. And I'm always actually more interested in the person who's never told a story before, because I sometimes find that actually those kind of stories from people who've never spoken up or have felt maybe anxious about taking to a stage can actually be some of the most powerful stories that are shared. And I know that for a fact because I've seen it at the Dublin Story Slam over the last 7 years. The person who's always reluctant is always like, no, I don't know if I can do it. And then they get up story, and just through the act of telling that story, it's almost like a transformation process. They become the most powerful person in that room. So storytelling actually gives people the confidence to express themselves, to find their inner voice, but also to develop communication tools. If I know that I'm getting up and I'm telling a story, I'm going to feel an awful lot more confident than if I'm getting up and I have to impart a piece of information or a key part of strategy. So storytelling allows us to kind of build up that natural, authentic inner voice that we can then use to communicate with our teams. It could be a leader that is communicating to their team, or it could be an intern who's just started off into the organization. It works both ways. Communicate by developing your communication skills, you're going to improve the overall organization's communication. And the other thing is that it kind of storytelling, it encourages people to talk to each other afterwards. I'm always a big fan of there's a story that's told on the stage, and then there's the conversations that story generates afterwards. So even communicating to each other, forget about whoever is up on stage. Storytelling is a really great source of connection, allowing people to connect to each other and talk to each other and communicate with each other in a more open and honest kind of way. And then finally, I find that storytelling for an organization is a great way to give that organization a clear sense of direction. So the first thing I always kind of go for people, asks people is what do you want to achieve with this story? And again, it could be, a senior partner in an organization, or, chief exec like Owen Keegan, what is it that you want the audience to take away from the story? And that it's that kind of sense of direction in the story that it gives the speaker confidence in terms of what they're delivering, but it also amplifies the direction of the organization. It's like, I remember when we worked with Deloitte on, there was an Ascend policy, or sorry, Ascend strategy for 2025. So major piece of strategy that had to be unveiled. And when we were working with Deloitte on that, we asked them, well, like, what are the core values you think that this organization needs in order to achieve that strategy? And then we built a whole storytelling. Initially, I think it was going to be like maybe 3 or 4 stories, and then it ended up being like 16 stories. And by the end of the day, there was actually not a single piece of strategy, no graphs, no slides, no presentations. It just ended up being senior leaders telling stories about the core values, about a time they were able to realize the importance of these values in their own personal lives. And so by amplifying those kind of core values, you're giving your audience like little signposts. This is where we want to go. This is what we need to tap into in order to kind of take it to the next stage. And they're all coming from past experiences as well, because, you know, it's a bit of a cliche statement saying, how do we know where we're going if we don't know where we've been? But it really is true. Your teams, your people, your staff, your volunteers, they all have a huge legacy of memories and of experiences of working for various charities, various issues. And it's by mining, or not mining, but like tapping into those experiences, you can harness the power of them. And that in turn can help the organization itself even decide where it wants to go. So storytelling is an amazing way to give people guidance, okay? Give your organization that sense of direction. So, okay, I'm sold. I want to go for stories, but like, how exactly can we apply them within the organization? How are we going to make us better by sharing our stories? Well, you can do it in 3 kind of separate ways. The first is you can do it at public events. And this is probably the kind of, maybe you have already kind of done this before, but if I was unveiling, if I was doing a fundraiser, if I was unveiling a report, if I was unveiling a new direction, an issue, a statistic, if I was launching a campaign, storytelling is an amazing way to not just inform people about the issue, but to convince them what needs to happen in order to fix it. So when we're kind of doing, say, public kind of events, this is one we did with Children's Health Foundation, and they had just raised a ton of money, which was amazing for some much needed equipment. And so what we wanted to do is to show the audience the importance of where that equipment is. So we had a fundraiser, so somebody who had gone out and done volunteering and raised funds for that charity. We had a service user, mother of a patient, who actually benefited directly from it because they were able to build a new patient room for her. And finally, we had a healthcare professional who was able to talk about the impact of having a piece of equipment, and told beautiful, all 3 told very personal, true stories about what it was that, you know, the impact of the fundraising, and also what inspired the person to go out there and do the fundraising in reality. And that was done as a live kind of event, physical event. We've done stuff with Alone, with Irish Heart Foundation as well at the Dublin Story Slam, with First Fortnight, Mental Health Awareness Festival. And it's all about the same. It's like, again, it goes back to that core values. Well, like, what is it that you actually want to achieve? What is it that you want to show the audience about this charity, about this not-for-profit, about this issue? And then you help kind of allow storytelling do the hard work. It's like, remember, information, statistics, they inform people, but it's going to be personal stories that will convince people that what they need to do in order to fix it. So that's just one way that you can take your teams, your people, your staff, your leaders, your volunteers, you can take their stories and share those stories with the public at physical events or virtual events. The other way is a private events. And this is kind of what we've been working with Deloitte on. And these are internal events. So these aren't meant for the public. They are meant for people in teams right across the organization. At the moment, we're working with St. James's Hospital on creating an internal kind of storytelling event, similar to the one that I mentioned in Stanford. And the idea here is to kind of create that space where your teams can come together, that they can connect with each other, they can learn how to become better communicators and more powerful communicators. And also the organization itself, everybody can kind of align with each other by sharing stories that reflect the values of the organization. So that's just two examples. One is the public events, two is the private. And then the third one, which is one that we're quite excited about, and this is what we're working on with Deloitte. So originally we would have done a lot of internal kind of events, and they would be for whoever was there in the room at the time. They usually do not go outside the room. And what we've done recently is worked for, as part of their Mental Health Impact Week. There is going to be a series of videos, and we've been, again, helping people find, develop, and deliver stories about their journey through mental health. And more importantly, about tools that they have used and how they discovered their use, how they first came across them, really. So that right across the organization, people can take these tools and, have conversations with themselves about their own mental health. And is there something there that I need to work on? As well as the whole idea of mental health across a large organization. So these will be videos that probably be shared internally, not publicly, but that's now a resource that Deloitte now have. So whereas before you kind of have an experience that you need to be in the room in order to, experience it, now you have a resource that I can go back and I can share right across my organization. So when it comes to stories, yes, you can have the public events and they are incredibly powerful, but I think actually that there's much more potential, and it's probably underused, the idea of telling stories internally, from staff and from teams and from leaders, and trying to kind of build up those organizations, build up their resilience, help them find where it is that they want to go next. And I think storytelling is really key in achieving that. So where are we timed? I'm going to play you a short story because I've done a lot of storytelling. So this will give you an indication of the kind of stories that we share at the Story Slam. This could very well have been told by a member of a team to, say, other healthcare professionals. In this case, it was Mairead Murphy, who's a lactation consultant. And Mairead has been come to the Story Slam, literally started just come to the Story Slam, popping her name into the hat, getting up on stage. And as I said, she took part in our Grand Slam championship at the Abbey Theatre. And Mairead got up and told the story. The theme was precious. And the story is, I'm going to kind of slightly edited version, shorter version of it. It's about 7 minutes long. And it's basically about how when Mairead was a student nurse moving to Cork to become a professional, she felt quite alone because she didn't really know anybody. Okay, so here's Mairead Murphy.
And the day that I left for Cork City, I was very much aware that I...
Sounds dropped there from me, Julien. I'm not sure if others was working. Was working perfectly. Try again. Oh, you're on mute actually, Julien, there. Maybe that has caused the...
Okay. Oh, right, okay. Maybe it is. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, so we go again. Tell me, give me a thumbs up, Adrian, if you can hear this. Oh.
And the day that I left for Cork City, yeah, I was very much aware that I knew nobody in Cork. I knew nobody starting nursing training with me. When I got there, I met the other 18 girls. They were all from Cork. And there was a sort of a tenuous connection between them all. her dad was in the same tennis club as her dad, and their mammies went to school together, and they were vaguely related. It was like a big, sticky spider web of darkness. And I felt alone. I felt different. I felt apart. It was a tough training. It was compulsory to live in the nurse's home, which was physically attached to the hospital and to the School of Nursing. And I kept my distance from the girls, not sure if I was part of them. And it was a bloody hard day's work, the sadness of life, of humanity. And I'm not ashamed to say I often came home and cried myself to sleep in my little room. We were all separate bedrooms along a long corridor and a shared bathroom and shared sitting room. I went out with the girls. There was inviting for go out for coffee. There was invitations to go to the discos. And I went, but I still felt I'm still apart, still not quite part of the gang. And then one October night, I was just so stressed. I was on night duty, and it just happened that the night I was on was the night the clocks were going back, and it made my 12-hour shift a 13-hour shift, making our 84-hour week an 85-hour week. I was stressed. I felt the responsibility on my shoulders of minding my patients so heavily. My staff nurse went down to help out in A&E. The office phone rang. I thought, Jesus, are we going to get another A&E casualty? Jesus, how are we going to manage this? I picked up the phone and announced to myself, Student Nurse McCarthy, St. Anthony's Ward. And then I heard it. Close your eyes, give me your hand, darling. Do you feel my heart beating? Hey, Smurf, we're down in Clancy and we're having the crack, but we miss you, girl. We miss you something wicked. Come here. Are you off next weekend? Because we're off. I said, yeah, I'm off next weekend. We're going together. I listened to them breaking back into another Bananarama song. Their laughter trickled down through the phone. The three of them stuck into a public phone box in Clonakilty, ringing me, missing me, wanting me as part of their gang. I said, will you go away before you get me fired? I'll see you next weekend. And I put the phone down. And I pulled my cardigan around me and walked down to see my patients. And I met Jack, aged 80, shuffling up with his IV drip towards the loo. Now there's a lovely smile for 4 o'clock in the morning, he said. I said, Jack, I've just found something very precious. Well, girl, if you find something precious, hold on to it. Hold on to it. What that call did for me, it lifted me. It enveloped me into the gang, my friends. I opened up to them and we realized we were all finding our training really hard. But we started supporting each other more now that we knew how each other felt. We supported each other the good times. I resourced somebody today and he's doing great. Or the male patient today had an involuntary erection while I was trying to do a pubic shave. Jeez, Maria will say you'll have a black eye in the morning. And then there was the sad days, and they were more often than you would imagine. We remember one day, myself and Anna, we were working in the kiddies ward, and a beautiful little boy, 3 years of age, he was just coming back from theatre after a procedure. And now that his little boy was back safe in his bed, his dad went down the 4 flights of stairs for a badly needed cigarette and a coffee. And the little boy arrested. And we tried everything, over and over. But he slipped away. And when nothing could be done, myself and Anna fell into each other's arms and hugged each other. Grief struck with this loss. And there, down the long corridor, came his dad. Saw us, didn't even have to be told, just ran up. No, no, please, no. If I didn't have my girl gang to support me that evening, I would have been broken. So that's the end of the story. Our friendship is 35 years old, older than a lot of people in this audience. We had the best crack ever during our training days. We'd head out clubbing. We'd go for the garlic burgers. And then those of us who were in the best condition would bring those in a worse condition home in a Dunster's trolley. We're all, well, I was going to say middle-aged, but I don't think I lived to 112. Two of the girls had to be blue lighted to hospital with various faints and stuff, and one has had a brain scan, so I'm still standing. That friendship is precious, and if any of you are lucky enough to have a friendship like that, hold on to it. Your friends will hold up a mirror to you, and you will see what they like, you will see what they love, and you'll start to like yourself. Thank you.
That was Mairead Murphy there with a beautiful story that, as I said, I think even though that was told at a public event, you know, I'm sure a lot of that could be really applied to the important work, you know, that happens within the charity sector and not-for-profits too. You know, that idea of like surrounding yourself with a good, solid team, and then that team is what actually helps get you over the line when there's a challenge. And that story really resonated with everybody in the room because it's also just a story about kind of friendship. But if we kind of look at like in a little bit more detail about like, well, what is actually that makes a story great? The first thing is that there has to be a kind of sense of action, right? There has to be a sense that like you're telling something and it's a single experience almost. So even though Mairead's story is actually about a whole career and a lifelong friendship, a lot of the action just takes place one night on a ward. So it's about trying to identify those moments, those kind of standout moments. If you're trying to think of like, yeah, I couldn't tell a story, so what would I talk about? You just kind of look for simple standout moments. They're usually not too far below the surface. And the thing is that you sometimes just kind of dismiss them or think like, sure, that's not really that important. But it could literally be a conversation that you had with somebody that it could actually yield a really surprising story. And the great thing is that when you have that kind of clear sense of action in your story, that's going to grab the audience because everybody wants to know, oh, she picks up the phone, she hears what raises her ear to it, what happens next? Everybody wants to hear what happens next. But action on its own will only get you so far. The other ingredient that your story, any story, needs to really have is emotion. And there's a lot of emotion in Mairead's story, but because there's a lot of action happening too, she can kind of dip into the emotion and then dip out and go into the action. Dip into the emotion, dip out into the action. And the important thing about emotion is that like emotion is a universal language that we all speak. So no matter what the issue or what the cause or what the campaign is that you're trying to explain, try to find or talk maybe about the issues, the emotions of fear, hope, frustration, anger, empowerment, and that feeling of like, yes, I can do this, and resilience. They're all emotions that kind of might actually be underpinning whatever it is that you're trying to achieve within your own organization. So telling a story that's based on emotion is really good. Now, it comes with a big caveat. And that is you only ever share a story we have a kind of a saying here, you share a story about a scar and not a wound. So what that means is the issues that you're all dealing with and the things that you're fighting for can be incredibly painful and challenging. So I would never tell a story about something that was really bad and it's really traumatic and it happened to this person who was a friend of mine or whatever like that. And then the story never really goes beyond that. It stays in that kind of trauma. What you're looking for is something that was very much painful at the time, is still very much a part of, you know, the experience of you. But it's kind of healed over a little bit. You learned something valuable from it. And that's what you're sharing with the organization, with your teammates. And that actually then gives you a license to talk about, you know, a lot of different subjects that maybe you would have thought like, oh, maybe it's a bit too sensitive or it's a bit too kind of emotional. Now, when it comes to stories that, you know, for service users, for example, you got to be incredibly careful. Like they have to, you can't tell somebody else's story without their permission. You can't tell a story that involves another person without giving that person kind of warning as well. So that's just something that you kind of work out as you go along, you know, as you're trying to tell the story. But when telling stories that are very emotional as well, you just kind of got to tread carefully, okay? And then the final thing is about meaning, you know, like what is it that you actually ultimately want the audience to take away? What is the point of your story? What is that core value of your organization that you want the team, or you want your leaders, or you want first year or volunteers? You know, what is it that you want them to actually align with, to be inspired by? Because if you can identify what that meaning is, what those kind of core values, you'll start to find stories based around each one of those core values. And they're 3 really good places to find stories. So you look for something physical in the external world that happened. It doesn't have to be the most dramatic thing in the world. Mairead's story was about a phone call. She got late one night. That was it. So your story can be about that kind of casual, everyday kind of encounter. Sometimes actually they're the most powerful ones. Your story also can be a place of emotion. So you can tap into a time at work, working on a campaign, working with a service user where you felt that emotion, you felt inspiration, you felt hope, you felt fear, you felt frustration. If you find that emotion, those times where you felt those emotions really acutely, that's where you'll find a story worth sharing. And then finally, where are you going to find your stories? Try and think of the things that have given you and your organization, that give them meaning. It could be kind of core values. It could be a call to action. So for example, if I'm launching a campaign and I want the audience specifically to do something, this could be write to a local TD. It could be, you know, donate what you can towards a particular cause or campaign. I'm going to determine what story will best inspire people and empower them to do the action, to do the call to action that you want to achieve with your story, with your talk, with your event. So look, that's hopefully just a few little kind of tools maybe that you can kind of take away with. I know it's all incredibly condensed as well, so hopefully it's a good thing that you have the recording. You can reach out to us, story at the Dublin Story Slam, if you kind of want to get in contact with us as well. And I suppose what we'll do now is maybe, Adrienne, do we want to questions, or if there's anything like that I can kind of
questions? Yeah, so happy to, if anyone wants to put them in the chat, I can field them to Julien or in the Q&A box. That was great, Julien. Thanks again for your time. I'll let people think about their questions before I but yeah, fantastic to see that lady in action. She's brilliant. How did she do at she went on to the Grand Slam, you were saying, that lady, did she?
That was the Grand Slam, yeah. So that was recorded
yeah.
on stage at the Abbey Theatre as well. So there's a question in there from Amy Gibney about is this storytelling both for staff internally but also for NGOs to promote their own stories of service users? So you can still, yeah, you can definitely apply service users' stories. But what I find is actually very powerful, because is that as opposed to just telling somebody else's story, you can have somebody talk about how that story affected them. So, for example, if you're going out and you're meeting service users who are facing these challenges, telling that as a story from your own perspective. So, for example, you know, there was one woman I met and she was absolutely amazing. And I kind of got a call and she said, come over to the house, I have to talk to you. So I walk inside the door, I sit inside, I look around the room, and it's just, it's a real, you know, it's a real sight. And I feel a bit nervous, I'm not really sure what to say. And I sit down with her, and then she tells me. You know, so you can tell other people's stories, but the key to it is that if you tell it from your own perspective, it just becomes so much more powerful. Yeah. And it also does that person, you know, that service user more of a, it's not that it's, I think it just makes their story more real, because you're experiencing the story in real time, almost as you experienced it. Whereas if I read, Siobhan is 26 years of age and lives in this person, it's like, I'm kind of getting it, but you're not using the full power of storytelling to bring me into that world and to really make me connect with that service user and their experience. Yeah. So if you are sharing stories about other people, external third persons, try and consider sharing that story from the person who actually recorded that interview, or, you know, who went out and questioned that person as part of whatever report or survey that was happening as such. I just think that's a way to do it. Oh,
there's a couple of questions there around this kind of similar theme around how did you encourage people to share their stories? So to do something like this.
So there's a couple of ways. Sometimes, you know, organizations will put a call out for people. The very first thing we did with Deloitte, which I thought was really powerful, was we actually got the top tier people. So it was partners. Brian Forrester, I think, was the very first person to tell stories. And once the organization saw a leader telling a story, that actually empowered them to share their own story. So sometimes if it's an organization and it's the first time you're trying something like this, I would actually begin with the most senior leaders and let them open up, let them get personal, and tell a story, because that in a way is messaging and sending out the message that one, we want to hear your stories, but two, that there's also a real power in that kind of honest storytelling. Now, again, it all goes back to scar, not wound. So we're not kind of looking for, you know, stories that will make, oh, poor such and such person went through this terrible thing. It's not about those kind of stories. It's more like such and such went through that really hard, challenging thing, but what they learned was, you know, whatever it is, whatever tool it is that you want to give your audience.
Yeah.
And that's your second way of empowering people. You basically ask them, what is it that you would have loved to have known when you started off working in this area? So say, for example, if I'm speaking to a team of volunteers and I've been at this for 10 years, I would be telling that team about some of my very first experiences when I was their age and when I was at their phase and I was starting. And again, you want the ones that are going to kind of empower people and inspire people. So trying to kind of, you know, I say use senior leaders, start off that way. And then asking people, like, it goes to the meaning, you know, what do you want them to do? Well, I want them to know that, you know, it's okay if you get upset, but you know, you have a team of network of people here who can actually support you, you know, through this really important work. Yeah. So there are two different ways of doing that.
There's a couple of questions in the Q&A box as well. I'm not sure you can see those ones, but I'll read them out. So I suppose you did share a couple of examples, but any other examples of not-for-profits, NGOs, charities, or companies who applied this in an event or in another way that stand out to you that you can share with the group?
I like the Irish Heart Foundation one. That was for a campaign where it was urging women to get themselves checked up, because it was a story. I think the tradition basically, or the perception basically was that a woman will always check on the man, or are you okay? Oh, quick, off to the hospital with you. Whereas the challenge was like, well, what about you? Are you feeling okay? And the one story that stood out in particular was about a nurse, and she was like worked in the cardiac or in the heart department basically, and she was witnessed in real time her having her own heart attack, and then the kind of work then that happened when she went into it and actually told that experience both from a woman's perspective but also somebody who was experiencing it firsthand. And that story was really powerful because it was full circle. You had a story where you had a campaign message, and then you had somebody showing you the importance of that campaign message, why it is that you should do do the thing that we're asking you to do.
Yeah.
That's just one kind of
that's great. Finding a couple of themes coming out in some of between the chat and the Q&A box. The next one is probably, when you talk about maybe encouraging maybe a senior leader to go first, how do you kind of help them get over maybe reluctance or nerves or anxiety around public speaking? Is there any tips or tricks there?
Well, there's two. Well, look, in my limited experience of doing this, but there's two ways basically that I on the amount of people that I've worked with, this seems to be the way to go, is that there's a lot of focus on how you deliver a story, right? Also, eye contact. What do you do with your hands? Where should you position yourself? How do you breathe? How do you, breathe in through the tummy and exhale? And I remember working with one person, and they were been prepared for like a show on the Late, and it was 3 full days of this. And at the end, they just told, look, off with you, get lost. I can't take this anymore, because all that was doing was just stressing people out. It was like, oh, here's a whole other bunch of things and tools and tips and insights that I need to remember now when I'm delivering that story. And the funny thing is that actually when you know your story, so when like the structure is a pretty simple kind of structure, but it's more about when you know where you want to bring the audience. It gives you a massive sense of self-confidence. It actually, you stop so much focusing on like, oh, I have to remember how this was written out or what the actual word for word kind of count. You just focus more on the telling of it. And then because you're visibly relaxed, the audience becomes relaxed and they start listening more to you as well. So it's about trying to make people realize that their everyday experiences, they are more than enough to actually entertain a room, and keep an audience's attention right until the very end. And that's what we work on. We try and find, first of all, what is it, the message? What is the thing that you want to achieve with this talk? Then find a personal experience that shows the audience where that message came from. And then we structure the story and they kind of share it. And it's amazing. We've done stuff like, oh, we've got 2 weeks and we have to get up in front of 500 people and I don't even have a story. What am I going to do? Sit down, you talk with them, right? What is the event about? Well, what is that you want the people to do at this event afterwards? Like, what do you want them to walk away with? Okay. When did you experience that? Okay. And slowly you just kind of filter down until you find that unique kind of experience. Could be something that they never have thought of in a million years. The other thing is that storytelling inspires other stories. So for example, initially with leaders, especially very experienced kind of leaders who have decades of experience of public speaking, telling a story can actually be a little bit of a challenging experience. And I know I worked with one person who was like, I'm not too convinced. And then once they heard the other people's stories during a rehearsal, completely changed. Like, okay, I got it. And they got up and told a really powerful personal story that had everybody kind of talking afterwards. But the story beforehand was a very formal, stilted, this is how I present, and I'm going to just perform in the exact same way that I've done it 5,000 times before. So stories actually really inspire storytellers.
Great. Are there any other questions from the group before we bring the webinar to a close? Anyone would like to add anything else into the Q&A or chat box? If there's anything that we didn't get to answer, we'll try and do so after today for you. Come back with resolution to any question we didn't answer. But as I said, Joe from Business in the Community will share the recording with everybody at the end of the week. And really just to say, Julien, huge thank you for your time and for this audience this week through our Impact Week. It's great to be able to connect you and what you do with organisations and charities, because I know, as I said, seen firsthand really what it's brought to us as an organisation in Deloitte. So thank you again.
No, well, I think that Deloitte, I have to say, have been a pleasure to work with, because everybody has always been very open about tapping into their own personal experiences, and have gone through that cycle many, many times for events, thinking I don't have a story to tell, and then they end up telling the story that everybody's talking about afterwards as well. It's story at the Dublin Story Slam. If anybody wants to reach out afterwards or has any particular questions, I'll do my best to answer them. And then at Dublin Story Slam on Instagram as well, if you want to find out more about what we do.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks so much for coming along today. Bye.
Thanks everybody.